They told me I was dead to them. They erased me from their world, cut me from the family records, and stripped me of every right to my father's name. To them, I was nothing more than a shadow of the past, a mistake to be forgotten. But I did not die. I endured. I waited. I learned how to turn pain into fuel, silence into strength. And when the time was right, I came back not to beg, not to plead, but to take everything they once denied me. My name is Amina, and this is the story of how I was disinherited by my own family, and how I returned to ruin them all. But before I tell you how I tore down their empire brick by brick, I need to take you back to when everything looked perfect, when I still believed in family, when I still believed in love, loyalty, and promises. Because every story of revenge begins with trust, and mine was shattered the moment I realized the people I trusted most were the ones sharpening the knives behind my back. When I think back to my childhood, I remember the laughter first, the sound of my father's deep voice echoing through the halls as he lifted me onto his shoulders, promising that one day, everything he had built would be mine to carry forward. I remember my mother's gentle hands brushing my hair, her soft words teaching me kindness, reminding me that family was everything. And then there was Fame, my older brother, strong, confident, and always the one I thought would protect me. We were not poor, but we were not obscenely rich either. My father's business was respected, our name carried weight, and I believed that no storm could ever touch us. In school, I excelled, pouring myself into books, dreaming of the day I would use my knowledge to help others, to grow something that mattered. When I graduated at the top of my class, my father threw a grand celebration, gathering relatives, business partners, and friends to honor me. That night, under the glow of chandeliers and the hum of congratulatory voices, I felt like I was standing at the threshold of the future he had always promised me. But beneath the surface of that glittering evening, there were cracks I was too naive to notice. A cousin who looked at me with barely concealed envy, a business partner who whispered too often into Fame's ear, my father's laughter, sometimes too forced, his gaze clouded with unspoken worries. I didn't understand it then, but that night was not a celebration of my future, it was the beginning of its end. The day my world shattered was not marked by storms or darkness. The sun was shining, the air was calm, and I walked into my father's study with the kind of confidence only a daughter who trusted her family could carry. The lawyer was there, papers neatly stacked on his desk, my relatives seated around the polished mahogany table. I thought this was a formality, a simple acknowledgement of what had been promised to me my entire life. But when my father began to speak, his voice was steady, rehearsed, and merciless. To my son, Fame, he said, "I leave everything, our home, our businesses, our name, and our legacy." He paused, almost as if the weight of the next words burned on his tongue. "And to my daughter, Amina, nothing." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. My heart pounded in my ears, my throat went dry. I searched the faces around me, my mother's eyes downcast, my cousins whispering behind their hands, Fame's smug smile barely concealed. It felt like a performance, one where I had unknowingly been cast as the fool. They spoke of practicality, of tradition, of how woman was too soft to lead, too emotional to carry the weight of an empire. My father pushed a check across the table, a fraction of what was mine, by right, and called it support for my future. In that moment, something inside me broke. I stood, refusing to let them see my tears. My voice trembled, but my spine remained unbent. "If this is what family means to you," I said, "then I want no part of it." And with that, I walked out of the room, each step heavy with betrayal. Each breath a vow I didn't yet have the courage to speak aloud, that this was not the end. That night, I packed my life into 2 suitcases, clothes, a few books, and a single brooch my mother once gave me. The only thing I couldn't leave behind. I walked away from the house I once called home, into the night, with no plan, no safety net, and no family left to claim me. What I didn't know then was that this exile was not my downfall. It was the fire that would forge me into something stronger. Exile is a strange kind of death. It strips you of identity, of belonging, of certainty. The night I left, I thought I was walking into nothingness, and in many ways I was. I found myself in a new city, alone, with only the sound of my own footsteps reminding me I was still alive. At first, survival was all I could manage. I took odd jobs waiting tables, filing paperwork in cramped offices, tutoring children for pennies, anything to keep food on my plate and a roof, no matter how small, over my head. Each night, I would collapse on a narrow bed, exhausted, humiliated, but determined never to crawl back to the family who had cast me out. The bitterness lived in me like a shadow. I would see their faces in my dreams, my father's stern eyes, Fayam's smirk, the silent complicity of relatives who said nothing as I was erased. During the day, I swallowed my pride and pushed forward. But at night, I whispered promises to myself. I would not remain broken. I would not remain forgotten. Years passed and hardship shaped me. I saved every coin, studied quietly in libraries, taught myself the language of business, finance, and law, the very tools my family once said I was too soft to master. I learned how to network, how to read people, how to turn weakness into leverage. I built connections in small ways, helping others, earning trust, never revealing who I truly was. But the ache of betrayal never left. It sharpened into focus the day I stumbled across something my father never intended me to find. In the bottom of an old box of documents I had taken when I left, there was a ledger, cryptic numbers, coded entries, offshore accounts. It spoke of secret dealings, of money hidden where no eyes were meant to see. My heart raced as I realized what I held in my hands: proof of corruption. A weapon waiting for the right moment. That night, as I traced the faded ink under the light of a single lamp, I understood for the first time that I had more than anger. I had leverage. I had purpose. And slowly, a plan began to form. I would not simply survive. I would return. I would rise as someone new, someone they would never see coming. And when the time was right, I would make them choke on the very legacy they stole from me. When I finally returned to the city I once called home, I was no longer Amina, the discarded daughter. That name had been buried the night I walked out of my father's study. In its place, I had crafted someone new, Sana Malik, an investor with capital, experience, and a reputation, built carefully, brick by brick, in places far from their reach. I walked into the city not as a beggar for scraps of acknowledgement, but as a woman cloaked in confidence and mystery. I rented an apartment high above the skyline, sleek and modern, with glass walls that reflected not who I had been, but who I had become. Every detail of my new identity was calculated: the tailored suits, the measured smile, the calm authority in my voice. I attended charity galas, networking events, and business dinners, quietly inserting myself into the same circles my family dominated. The first time I saw my brother again, years older, arrogance still etched across his features. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was Sana, a potential investor, a promising ally. He extended his hand with the polished charm of a businessman who thought he held all the cards. I smiled, my heart beat steady and shook it. In that moment, I tasted victory for the first time. Even my father, now older, his once commanding presence softened by illness, failed to see me. He glanced at me during events, polite but distant, never questioning who I truly was. My mother passed by me at a charity fundraiser once, our shoulders brushing. She offered a courteous smile to Sana Malik without realizing she had just smiled at the daughter she had let slip away. Behind the scenes, I moved carefully. I began buying discreet stakes in companies tied to my family's empire, weaving myself into the financial web they thought they controlled. I courted their allies with charm and subtlety, offering terms fame could not match, planting quiet doubts about his leadership. And all the while, the ledger I had uncovered years ago sat like a blade at my side, evidence of corruption waiting to be unsheathed. At a grand gala one evening, fame raised a glass in a toast to new partnerships, fresh alliances, and the bright future of our family business. The chandeliers sparkled above us. Cameras flashed, laughter filled the air. I clinked my glass against his, holding his gaze, the faintest of smiles curling my lips. He had no idea that the woman standing across from him was not his ally, but the storm gathering at his doorstep. Once I had stepped back into their world, the game truly began. My brother thought he had found in me a new investor, someone eager to attach herself to his success. But I had no intention of being a silent partner. Every move I made was deliberate, every gesture designed to loosen the bricks that held his empire together. First, I went after his allies. Suppliers who had relied on his contracts for years found themselves courted by me. I offered them slightly better terms, a touch more respect, the sense that I saw them as more than stepping stones to profit. Slowly, loyalties shifted. A whisper here, a promise there, and soon enough, the first cracks appeared in his network of trust. Next, I moved through the shadows of the media. Quiet investments in local outlets gave me influence over the stories that trickled into the public eye. Anonymous reports began to surface, whispers of financial irregularities, audits that didn't quite add up, hushed rumors of offshore accounts. Nothing too bold, nothing that could be traced directly back to me. Just enough to plant seed of doubt, to make people question if my brother's leadership was as flawless as he wanted the world to believe. I also found power in the corners of the family itself. Relatives who had been pushed aside by fame's arrogance, cousins who had been denied their rightful shares, uncles who had been silenced, all found in me a sympathetic ear. I listened, I consoled, and when the time was right, I offered help, legal advice, financial support, even just the warmth of being heard. In return, they gave me stories, details, and most importantly, loyalty. And then came the boardroom. I had begun acquiring proxy shares quietly, piece by piece, until I could no longer be ignored. At investor meetings, I asked questions fame had no good answers for. Where did this sum disappear to? Why has this account not been audited in years? My voice was calm, never accusatory, but always precise, always cutting just deep enough to draw blood. The more I pressed, the more his composure cracked. At one meeting, his mask slipped completely. In front of the board, he snapped at me. "This woman, this Sana, she knows nothing of how we run things here. She is just a newcomer, meddling where she doesn't belong." I smiled, slow and deliberate, and leaned forward. "Perhaps I am new here," I said softly, "but sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see the rot that those inside have learned to ignore." Gasps filled the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty beginning to wobble. Fayum's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had just lost a battle he didn't even realize had been planned, and as I walked out of that room, I felt the tide turning. Their empire was beginning to tremble, and they still had no idea who was behind the storm. 4 months. I had played my part flawlessly, smiling, investing, weaving myself into their world like silk threads into an old tapestry. But no disguise lasts forever. It happened one evening, not in some grand boardroom or glittering gala, but in the quiet intimacy of a private dinner. My father had insisted on meeting me Sana Malik, the investor who had become too influential to ignore. He wanted to discuss strategy, to hear my thoughts on the company's future. When I arrived, he was waiting in the library of his mansion, the same house where I had once cried myself to sleep as a child. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Shelves heavy with books no one read. The smell of old wood and leather, the fire flickering in the hearth. For a moment, the past clawed at me, whispering memories I had buried, nights of silence, days of rejection, the cold indifference of parents who never truly looked at me. He was older now, frailer. His once commanding voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "You remind me of someone," he said, narrowing his eyes. "There's something familiar about you. The way you speak, the way you look at me. Who are you really, Sana?" My heart clenched, but my face remained unreadable. I smiled. "Just an investor who believes in your company." But he wasn't convinced. His gaze lingered too long, his suspicion rising. And for the first time, I realized the danger of being recognized, not only by him, but by others. My brother, sharp with paranoia, would seize on any weakness, any inconsistency. One slip, and my carefully built disguise could unravel, and then, as if fate wanted to test me further, it happened, at a gala days later. My mother walked past me, her eyes brushing over my face. This time, she didn't simply smile politely. She froze. Her lips parted as though she had seen a ghost. "Amina," she whispered under her breath, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for my arm. The room spun for a moment. Music played, glasses clinked, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I leaned close, my smile never faltering, and whispered back, "You must be mistaken. My name is Sana." Her eyes filled with confusion, maybe even guilt. But before she could press further, I slipped away into the crowd. That night, for the first time, I felt the edges of control slipping from my grasp. The mask was still on, but it had cracked. And cracks, I knew, had a way of spreading. I had come too far to be unmasked now. If they were beginning to suspect who I was, then perhaps it was time to change the game entirely. After that night, nothing felt safe anymore. I had played my role with precision, but suspicion had been planted, and suspicion is like fire, it spreads quickly, devouring everything in its path. My mother's eyes haunted me, that look of recognition she could not explain away. I knew she would not stay silent for long. The following week, my fears proved true. Fame cornered me after a board meeting, his voice low, his smile venomous. "You know," he said, "I've been digging into your background, Sana Malik. For someone with so much money, you've left very few traces behind. Almost as if you appeared out of thin air." I tilted my head, matching his cold stare with a calm one of my own. "Or perhaps," I replied, "you're just not looking in the right places." But his suspicion only grew. He began watching me more closely, inserting questions into conversations, trying to unsettle me. And though I met every challenge with composure, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. The pressure mounted when I received a letter delivered in secrecy, no return address, no signature, just a single line written in a hand I recognized from my childhood. I know who you are. Be careful. My blood ran cold. Was it my mother? A relative? Or someone else entirely? The silence around me began to crack with whispers I couldn't trace. And then came the night of the gala, when everything changed. A charity event. Lavish as always, chandeliers glittering, laughter ringing through the air. I was mingling with investors when I felt a presence at my back. I turned, and there was my mother, standing too close, her face pale. "Why are you doing this, Amina?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" "From your brother." The name hit me like a slap, the sound of it so loud in my ears, though no one else seemed to notice. For the first time, the mask felt heavy, almost impossible to hold in place. I forced a smile, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "What I want," I murmured, "is what was always mine. What you all stole from me." Her eyes widened, shock and guilt twisting her features. Before she could respond, I stepped back into the crowd, leaving her staring at me as though she had seen a ghost. That night, I realized the truth. The time for shadows was ending. If my family was beginning to uncover me, then I would not wait for them to expose me. No, I would step into the light on my own terms, on my own timing, with every weapon at my disposal. The storm I had been building was ready, and soon they would feel its full force. The day came sooner than even I had expected. A shareholder summit, an event Fame had planned to showcase his dominance, to reassure wavering allies that he was in complete control. The ballroom shimmered with wealth, polished marble floors, glittering chandeliers, tables lined with gold-rimmed glasses. Every powerful name in the city was present. Fame stood at the center, radiating arrogance, certain he would silence any doubt. But I had chosen this night carefully. My allies were ready, my evidence prepared, and my mask, though cracked, was still firmly in place. As Fame began his speech, boasting of profits and vision, I stood slowly, interrupting him. The room quieted, eyes turning toward me. "Before we raise a glass to the future," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel, "perhaps we should examine the truth of the present." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Fame's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease breaking through his practiced smile. "This is not the time, Sana," he snapped, his voice tightening. "Oh, but it is," I replied, stepping forward. "Because the people in this room deserve to know where their money has gone. They deserve to know the truth behind the empire you claim to lead." I raised a folder in my hand, the ledger I had unearthed years ago, now backed by fresh audits and undeniable proof. Pages of offshore accounts, siphoned funds, shell companies tied directly to Fame. The kind of evidence that couldn't be brushed aside as rumor. Gasps filled the room as I spoke, each revelation striking like a thunderclap. Faces turned from him to me, confusion hardening into betrayal. Board members exchanged looks. Investors whispered. The trust he had spent years cultivating crumbled in a matter of minutes. My father, frail but still sharp enough, rose from his chair, his face ashen. "Fame, is this true?" he demanded, his voice breaking. Fame stammered, his composure shattering. "It's lies. Fabricated. This woman, she's nothing but." And then, he made his mistake. He spat the words in front of everyone. "She's not even who she says she is." The room went still. My heart pounded, but I did not falter. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled away the final veil. He's right, I said, my voice carrying across the hall. I am not Sana Malik, a collective gasp echoed. My mother's hand covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My father's face drained of color. I am Amina, I continued, my voice steady, unshakable. The daughter you abandoned. The sister you betrayed. The rightful heir to everything you tried to steal. The silence that followed was electric. Then the room erupted shouts, questions, disbelief. Cameras flashed as journalists pushed forward. Fayum's face twisted in rage, his downfall playing out before every eye that mattered. I stood at the center of it all. Not as the forgotten child, not as the discarded girl, but as the storm they had created, the storm that had finally broken free. And this time, I wasn't going to stop. The aftermath was nothing like I had imagined, yet everything I had anticipated. In the days following the shareholder summit, investigations began into Fayum's mismanagement and the embezzlement I had exposed. The boardroom trembled as resignations, audits, and legal actions cascaded through the company. Allies who had once whispered loyalty to him shifted toward me, recognizing not just my power, but the justice I carried with it. My father, older now, weakened by age and guilt, reached out. His apology was quiet, raw, the kind that comes only when regret has soaked into your bones. My mother wept openly, the weight of years of silence and complicity spilling from her. And Fame, my brother, though not truly my blood, came to me humbled, ashamed, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. I could have destroyed him, taken everything from him, left him in ruin. But I didn't. I offered him a choice: accountability, restitution, and a chance to rebuild with honesty, or face the ruin he had sown himself. He chose to rebuild. I reclaimed the company, yes, but more importantly, I reclaimed myself. I installed transparency in every corner of the empire my father had built, appointed Lena, my cousin and ally, to a leadership role, and launched the charity I had dreamed of as a child, the one they had dismissed as naive. Slowly, the mansion that once felt like a prison became a place of purpose, where justice and compassion guided decisions, not secrecy or favoritism, even as relatives refused to forgive, even as whispers of betrayal lingered in the air. I felt something I had never felt before: peace. Not because vengeance had been served, but because I had survived, risen, and transformed the story that was stolen from me into a legacy of my own. And now, as I sit here, looking back at the path I walked, the betrayal, the struggle, the return, I know this truth: family is fragile. Love is fragile. Trust is fragile. But strength, patience, and courage, those endure. To anyone listening who has been pushed aside, silenced, or erased, your story is not over. Survival is only the beginning. Growth, reclamation, and triumph are yours if you dare to wait, plan, and rise. I am Amina. I was disinherited, abandoned, and forgotten. And yet, here I stand, not to destroy, but to rebuild. Not just an empire, but a life reclaimed. And that is the sweetest revenge of all.